Good day and welcome to IndustryBroadcast.com's audio article number 46, parts A, B, and C. Today's audio article is a compilation of 3 audio articles written by Troy Gilbert. Troy is the founder of Mockingbird Games, makers of the game-making game. He has worked in the game industry since 2001 as a technology architect and game designer. Troy is involved in the indie game scene and is a writer and lecturer on the subject of lone wolf game development. He has served as an independent games festival judge for several years and currently sits on the visual engineering panel for the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences. To see just how innovative Mockingbird, the game-making game, really is, head over to www.playmockingbird.com. And of course, Troy's blog can be found at www.troygilbert.com. Audio article number 46, parts A through C, written by Troy Gilbert and read aloud by Ryan Wienko on the 16th of December, 2008. Part A, titled Getting Started with Flash Game Development. Alright, I'm going to make this quick and to the point. I'll leave digging up all the details to interested readers and listeners, but that shouldn't be a problem with the likes of Google. I'll get into more detail about each element of Flash game development in later posts, but first for some basic concepts. The Flash IDE. By this I mean the original traditional Flash authoring tool released by Macromedia, now Adobe. It is a fully integrated development environment for Flash by definition, as it essentially represents the official feature set. The software is primarily targeted at artists and designers, with programmers and larger application-like development being a secondary concern. The Flex IDE, this is the most recent offering from Adobe in the Flash line, is a targeted and rich internet application for developers and programmers alike. It's more similar to something like Java or C#. It's still all the same Flash technology, just packed for more application development. SWF, Shockwave Flash, the output of the Flash IDE and what runs in your browser, or technically, it runs in the Flash Player plugin in your browser or on your desktop. SWF is a compact and streaming file format that is somewhat documented by Adobe. Their documentation is usually just bad enough to slow down efforts to replicate their Flash IDE's full feature set. And it is not an open standard, though it practically is because it has been so often reverse engineered with a high degree of accuracy, and Adobe has no problem with this. Many non-Adobe Macromedia Flash related projects operate with the term SWF instead of Flash, as Flash is a trademark of Adobe, and they don't take too kindly to folks incorporating it into their product names. They prefer us to use SWF. Actionscript, the programming language for Flash. Actionscript, the programming language for Flash. Actionscript was originally a very stunted language used for rudimentary scripting, but was soon morphed into a real language. It's a full-blown object-oriented language that supports both strong static typing and weak dynamic typing. It is executed by a virtual machine in the Flash player, thus it is not as fast as native compiled code, C++ for example, and Flash currently does not have a JIT, just-in-time compiler like Java or C#, but Flash Player version 8 and 9 both made significant strides in improving virtual machine performance. One caveat of the VM is that the Flash Player will allow the user to kill any long-running, example a few seconds, loops. MTASC, the Motion Twin Actionscript Compiler, is what really blew open the open-source Flash community. Initially a replacement for the Flash IDE's slow and buggy compiler, it has turned into the GCC of the Flash universe. It can compile raw ActionScript text files just like every other programming language into SWFs. These SWFs can then be imported into the Flash IDE or used directly. SWF mill, an XML to SWF to XML processor. This tool serves as the linker in our open source toolchain. SWF mill can take a list of images, SWFs, and sounds, and convert them into an SWF file. Combined with the MTASC, one can go from a directory full of text files, PNGs, and waves to a standalone SWF game that runs in practically any web browser. Flash Develop. The open source IDE for Flash, written in C#, open sourced and actively developed. This is one of the best IDEs available for Flash, or rather Actionscript. It uses MTASC and SWF mill under the hood, and provides a great editor on top. Include all of the features one would expect: autocomplete, projects, plugins, integrated help, library browsing, etc., and I highly recommend it. There are a few tutorials that nearly all Flash game developers have seen, and they discuss Flash game development from a traditional perspective using the Flash IDE. They don't really cover how to develop it using only the free tools, but they are useful for understanding the basics of Flash as they relate to games. Tony Paw's tutorials on tile-based games, and check out his games, they're quite a bit of fun. Karupa also has excellent Flash tutorials. Flashier Flash has some excellent tile-based game tutorials as well. In general, I'd suggest aiming to do Flash development very similar to traditional 2D sprite-based development. With the newer Flash, there's a raw bitmap structure that you can access, and bit blitz are fast in Flash from one bitmap to another, so you can implement sprite-based stuff just as you would in a traditional language. You can then take advantage of Flash's extras, such as fast custom filters and great font support. Like I said, I'll speak about all of this in greater detail in a series of future posts, but this is just a start. Part B, titled Flex Rhymes With. Have I mentioned how much I like Flex? The Actionscript 3 language is a pleasure to program in. Garbage collected dynamic and static typing, single inherent class hierarchies, and built-in XML E4X manipulation. Flex Builder 2, which is Eclipse, is a spectacular IDE, trumping, dare I say, VS.NET 2003, my prior fave, but only with Visual Assist. Visual Assist still trumps all. And the inclusion of the declarative MXML programming hits a perfect sweet spot in my longtime HTML coder's heart. It just seems perfect. You know, kind of like exactly what I said would be the perfect game development environment back in March of 2006. I sung the praises of the mind shift in software development brought on by my Web 2.0, where production quality development truly is agile. They divide the problem into structure, behavior, and styling. Of course, the holy trinity of interaction. You find it time and time again when you dissect anything one would describe as interactive. Model view controller, input, process, output, listen, think, speak, structure, behavior, and styling. To recap, structure defines the layout of things, their relationships both spatially and conceptually. Behavior consumes the structure, plays on the structure like monkey bars, and moves through it. Finally, the styling determines how the structure is presented, provides feedback, and expresses. In practical software development terms, I've discovered that means one needs a declarative language, MXML, an imperative language, Actionscript 3, and support for skinning and/or style sheets, Flash CSS. Flex bundles all three of them together. Of course, it has a great application framework provided out of the box. That's free. In fact, along with the compiler, you just pay if you want the IDE, which is Eclipse, so you're actually just paying for the visual MXML editor, which is probably worth it, but certainly not required if you're patient or have experience with HTML and CSS. I can't imagine if there is a game dev framework for it. Now that would be sweet. Chalk up one for Adobe via Macromedia. Adobe Flex 2 is the finest software development kits, nay platform, that I have ever had the pleasure of dealing with. And this coming from a guy who spent the last 5 years convincing game studios to adopt a commercial SDK, renderware, so I can smell my own kind, and I don't smell Flex at all. Clean as a whistle. I think they will seriously give C#.net a run for its money. Sure, C#.NET is probably faster on a Windows box, no doubt about that, but is it that much faster? And .NET certainly doesn't have the Flash graphics engine backing it up. Your toolchain is already finished, and it only really works on Microsoft devices, and you have to download and install, and in Vista, enter an administrative password because it's a native exe with all of the potential problems. While Flash, well, Flash is ubiquitous. Hell, it's more standardized across user machines than Java or web browsers, and most certainly operating systems. And your input, output, and everything in between is identical on whatever platform your user is using. And it's all sort of integrated with and designed to leverage the always-on-net connection world that many of us live in. Go now if you can buy it off the shelf. I did. The best $500 I've spent in a long time. Absolutely no regrets. Part C. Using PHP for dynamic code generation. I've been using PHP lately to write the server side of our product. One of the nice mechanics of PHP is that a PHP file is actually a text file that is output as it is read, and the PHP code is simply escaped and executed. In other words, PHP is a templating language. While that's not news for most folk, it hadn't really hit home with me. Because PHP is a templating language, it is an excellent tool to use for doing code generation. So if it's good enough for generating HTML pages, then it's certainly good enough for generating Actionscript source files. A month ago or so, I was looking for a command line tool to take a list of assets, PNGs, MP3s, and make an SWF library out of them. My first stop was the excellent SWF mill. Unfortunately for me, SWF mill only supports up to version 8, and I'm using version 9, and the last thing I wanted was to have to cross between two action scripts, two virtual machines, just for loading assets. I posed the question to an excellent FlexCoders group, and promptly got a suggestion from Alex Hurai, member of the Flex team at Adobe, that I should just do a bit of Codagen to create an ActionScript class full of embedded assets, using Flex's embedded metadata. So that is what I did. I'll post the code sometime this weekend, and once I've tested it completely and cleaned it up a bit, but it seems to work. I did a bit of reading on how the module loading code for Flex was written to give me a solid basis for how to handle things. Basically, I generate a class that implements my own iAsset library interface, which is basically an interface that provides methods for querying and retrieving the embedded assets. The PHP Codagen simply scans a specific directory, grabs the appropriate file names, and populates a standard AS3 class. It then populates a few arrays mapping file names to embedded asset classes, and it's all done. The way PHP on the command line works, this just all spews out to stdout, so I wrapped it all up in a batch file that pipes things to a .as file, then called mxmlc ActionScript 3 Flex Compiler on that .as file. The results, after a very long time, mxmlc is a dog slow because it has to fire up Java, is an SWF with a single class in it, a sprite because root classes in SWFs have to inherit from sprite or movie clip that implements the iAsset library interface. I can then use the Flash API's loader class to load the SWF, cast it in an iAsset library, then retrieve my assets by file name. The big reason for doing this is that our current build loads each asset individually from an URL, like the web browser rendering a web page. This was entirely by design, modeled after a web browser, but in practice, after many months of design revisions, we no longer require the degree of flexibility, and it comes with a cost. The current build makes 228 separate gets to our server to gather all of the assets, most of which are in the 5 to 10K ballpark. That's a lot of network overhead, and code overhead as well, in both my code to manage all of these requests, and the Flash player dealing with all of those async calls. And magically, an SWF compresses PNGs and MP3s smaller than just the raw files, the elimination of redundancy headers or something, I'm sure. The total weight of all of these assets is 300K smaller, 6.5 megs compared to 6.8. This concludes audio article number 46, parts A through C. Written by Troy Gilbert. Blog can be found at www.troygilbert.com. As well as, if you have a few minutes to spare, why don't you check out Troy's innovative product called Mockingbird, the game-making game, at www.playmockingbird.com. Lastly, we definitely recommend you head back to industrybroadcast.com on a regular basis, as we do our very best to update the site frequently, bringing the collective